Welcome back, everyone, to Echoes of Ihsan, where we take those deep dives, into the heart of Islamic teachings. And today we're going to be looking at the Sunan Abu Dawud, specifically Book 7 on fasting. It's fascinating stuff.
It really is. Fasting, I mean, it's such a pillar,
Yeah,
in Islam. And the hadiths, they really give us this rich, tapestry of wisdom, guidance on so many different aspects from, Ramadan, the obligatory fast, all the way to the voluntary ones that really can enrich, our spiritual lives. And Abu Dawud, I mean, he did such a meticulous job preserving these teachings for us today.
yeah, and one that really caught my eye, I was looking at Hadith 2306. And this is where Ibn Abbas, companion of the Prophet, he's explaining this Quranic verse about fasting, how it was prescribed, for believers as it was for those before them. And so interesting, it says that initially Muslims fasted from like night prayer to night prayer.
Wow.
Imagine like continuously fasting throughout the night.
It's amazing that that level of dedication, right, really shows their commitment to fulfilling what they saw as a divine obligation.
Totally. But then Allah, in his mercy and understanding, revealed a new instruction, shifting the fast to daytime hours.
Right, recognizing those human limitations, it wasn't about lessening the worship, but making it more sustainable, accessible for everyone.
Yeah, it's that balance, isn't it? Devotion, but also practicality, this idea of concession utility. We see this in other parts of Islam too, right?
Absolutely. Like with travelers and prayer, shortening, combining them on a journey, or pregnant women, nursing mothers exempt from fasting. It's not about exceptions. It's part of the law, showing that concern for well-being.
It's so compassionate. Islam is about ease, not hardship. And speaking of exemptions, Hadith 2311, it goes on to outline more groups excused from fasting, the
Mhm.
elderly, those who are ill, traveling. It all comes back to that compassion, right? Especially for those who are vulnerable.
Yeah, and not just physical vulnerability. The hadith, it highlights taking care of yourself, not pushing beyond your capacity, especially where it could be harmful. This care, this consideration, it's woven throughout Islamic teachings. Charity, social responsibility, looking after the poor, the marginalized, all these acts of kindness.
It's a holistic approach, isn't it? Body, emotions, and spirit. Now let's talk about figuring out when Ramadan starts and ends. Hadiths 2312, 2315, 2318, 2319, they all point to moon sighting being key.
It's fascinating how moon sighting is so tied to the lunar calendar, which really governs so much of Islamic practice, right? It's like a visual reminder of that cyclical nature of time, how the moon waxes and wanes, mirroring the ebb and flow of life. And it reminds us of the importance of aligning our lives with these rhythms, these cosmic rhythms.
So it's the actual sighting of the new moon that marks the start of Ramadan. What happens if it's cloudy, though?
Well, the Hadith provides guidance for that too. If the moon isn't visible, then you calculate 30 days. It's about ensuring consistency and clarity within the community. This blend of observation and calculation, it really showcases the practical nature of Islam.
Makes sense. And it involves both individual observation and communal validation, right?
Yeah.
The hadiths mention cases where individuals testified to seeing the moon,
Hmm.
and the prophet, based on those testimonies, would declare the start of Ramadan.
Yeah, the role of community is so important in this practice. It's a collective effort to determine the start of Ramadan, really emphasizing the interconnectedness of the Ummah, the global community of Muslims.
And these practices, they connect us to the very beginnings of Islam, reminding us of that unbroken chain of transmission that's preserved these teachings for centuries. Now, hadiths 2320, 2322, and 2327, they delve into the rules about fasting before and after Ramadan, which can be confusing sometimes.
Yeah, these hadiths are really all about following those established practices based on the Prophet's guidance. They help to clarify things so we can navigate those practices with wisdom and understanding.
So, for instance, fasting right before Ramadan is generally discouraged unless it's already part of your routine, like you fast on Mondays and Thursdays. It's to avoid confusion about the start of Ramadan.
Exactly. It's about maintaining that consistency and clarity, ensuring the integrity of the obligatory fasts. And Hadith 2327, it even mentions that those who fast on a day when the moon sighting is doubtful are considered to be disobeying the Prophet's instructions. It emphasizes the importance of sticking to those established guidelines.
Wow. Okay, so now let's talk about voluntary fasting beyond Ramadan. Hadith 2329, it reveals that the Prophet Muhammad, he regularly fasted throughout the year, especially in Shaban, the month before Ramadan. It's pretty inspiring seeing that dedication going above and beyond.
It really is. The Prophet's actions, they serve as such a powerful guide for us. And his dedication to voluntary fasting, It highlights the spiritual benefit, the rewards that come with going beyond those basic requirements of worship.
So it's not just about doing the minimum, but striving for excellence in our relationship with Allah, going that extra mile.
Exactly. And the hadith specifically mentions the Prophet's fondness for fasting in Shaban, the month leading up to Ramadan. It's like a spiritual preparation, a way to get ready for the demanding month ahead.
But then, Hadith 2330 throws a curveball.
Yeah.
It prohibits fasting during the middle of Shaban. How do we reconcile that with all this emphasis on fasting during Shaban?
Well, this prohibition, it's sparked a lot of discussion, a lot of scholarly interpretation. While the specific reason might not be explicitly stated, it emphasizes the importance of following the Prophet's instructions even when the reasoning isn't clear to us.
It's about trust, isn't it? Trusting in the Prophet's guidance, even when we might not fully understand it.
Exactly. Sometimes the act of surrender is a form of worship in itself.
That's a powerful thought. Now, Hadith 2331 brings up something interesting, the importance of witnessing in Islamic practices, especially during Hajj.
Right. Witnessing is deeply embedded in Islam. Witnesses, they play a vital role in establishing truth, accountability. And in the context of Hajj, witnesses are required for certain rituals to ensure they're performed correctly, according to those Islamic guidelines.
It's about validation, isn't it? Confirming the fulfillment of those sacred rites.
Exactly. And the hadith mentions how the governor of Mecca during the Prophet's time stressed that Hajj should be performed after sighting the moon, or if the moon wasn't visible, based on the testimony of two trustworthy witnesses. It really underscores the importance of relying on credible sources, ensuring that our practices are done with integrity.
Transparency is so important.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the practices surrounding breaking the fast. Hadith 2337, 2341, 2343, 2346, 2348, and 2349, they provide quite a detailed look at this.
These hadiths, they offer really valuable insights into the etiquette and those recommended practices for breaking the fast. They stress the importance of hastening to break it, the types of foods and drinks, and even the supplications we should recite. It's about approaching this daily ritual with mindfulness, with gratitude, recognizing those blessings that come with it.
So we're encouraged to break the fast as soon as the time for Maghrib prayer comes in, without delay. What's the reasoning behind this?
Well, it goes beyond just satisfying physical hunger. It's about demonstrating our eagerness to follow the Prophet's example and embrace the blessings of ending the fast.
It's a beautiful act of obedience and aligning ourselves with that prophetic tradition.
Precisely. And the hadith even mentions the Prophet saying that religion will continue to prevail as long as people hasten to break the fast because the Jews and the Christians delay doing so. It underscores the importance of this specific practice as a mark of Islamic identity.
It's fascinating how these subtle differences play a role in shaping our identity and practice. And the hadiths also recommend dates and water as the preferred foods for breaking the fast. Why those specific choices?
Dates, they're a great source of energy, and they're readily available in the regions where Islam originated, making them a practical choice. Water, of course, is essential for rehydration after a day of abstaining.
Simple, natural foods. And there's a supplication mentioned that the Prophet used to recite when breaking his fast.
Yes, acknowledging Allah as the one for whom the fast was observed, expressing gratitude for the provision with which the fast is broken. It's a really beautiful expression of humility, recognizing that all sustenance ultimately comes from God.
It's a powerful reminder to approach the breaking of the fast with mindfulness and gratitude, recognizing those blessings that we often take for granted.
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus from just the physical act of eating to those spiritual dimensions of fasting, appreciating the opportunity to nourish both our bodies and our souls.
Speaking of the physical aspects of fasting, Hadiths 2350, 2357, 2358, 2359, and 2360, they explore the actions that are allowed while fasting. It's a topic that often comes up, especially for those who are new to fasting.
Right. And these hadiths, they really offer some clarity on that. They delve into specific actions and whether they affect the validity of the fast, guiding us on what's allowed and what's best to avoid.
So like using a toothbrush while fasting, it's
Mhm.
allowed, even encouraged. It's about hygiene, right?
Exactly. And the hadith mentions that the Prophet himself used a miswak, a type of toothbrush, while fasting. Maintaining good hygiene, it's seen as an act of worship in itself, purifying both our bodies and our souls.
Cleanliness is so important in Islam. And what about things like pouring water over yourself to cool down or rinsing your mouth?
Those are permissible too, as long as you don't intentionally swallow the water. It's about acknowledging those human needs for physical comfort while still maintaining the essence of the fast.
It shows that flexibility and practicality within Islamic law. Okay, let's move on to Hadiths 2361, 2362, 2367, and 2370. They talk about the impact of certain actions on the fast, addressing things like cupping and unintentional vomiting.
Yeah, they go into detail about these specific actions, clarifying rulings and exceptions. Like with cupping, it was initially considered to break the fast, but later rulings based on the Prophet's actions actually allowed it. It shows how Islamic jurisprudence can adapt over time.
It's fascinating how Islamic law can evolve and adapt based on new understanding.
Yeah.
What about unintentional vomiting? Does that invalidate the fast?
No, it doesn't. Hadith 2370 clarifies that. Again, it recognizes that we're human and our bodies don't always cooperate perfectly. It's about focusing on the spirit of the fast, not being overly rigid in those interpretations.
It's about the intention, the effort we make. Okay, let's talk about intimacy between spouses during fasting. It's a topic that often generates questions. And Hadiths 2374, 2378, 2379, 2380, and 2381 offer some guidance on this delicate matter.
Right. These hadiths, they offer a nuanced understanding of the permissible boundaries within a marriage while fasting. They acknowledge the importance of intimacy between spouses while still upholding the sanctity of the fast.
So, sexual intercourse is prohibited, but things like kissing and embracing, are those generally permissible?
They are, but it's important to approach these matters with mindfulness, with respect for the sanctity of the fast. It's about exercising self-control and avoiding actions that could lead to breaking the fast.
Right. The focus is on spiritual purification, deepening our connection with Allah. And Hadith 2381, it even mentions an instance where the Prophet allowed an older man to embrace his wife while fasting, but forbade a younger man from doing the same. It really highlights the need to consider individual circumstances.
It shows how wise and sensitive the Prophet's guidance was, recognizing that one-size-fits-all rulings don't always work. It's about applying the principles of Islamic law with that flexibility and understanding.
Now, let's talk about the gravity of intentionally breaking the fast during Ramadan without a valid reason. Hadith 2390 really drives this point home.
It emphasizes that intentionally breaking the fast is serious and requires sincere repentance and atonement. It's a reminder of the importance of upholding our religious obligations and the weight of deliberately violating them.
It states that even fasting continuously wouldn't be enough to make up for intentionally breaking a single fast in Ramadan.
It underscores the sanctity of this obligation, reminding us that Ramadan is a time for heightened spiritual awareness, for purification, for strengthening our relationship with Allah.
It's about recognizing the consequences of our actions, both in this life and the next, and prioritizing our spiritual growth during this blessed month.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's look at those concessions given to travelers regarding fasting, as addressed in Hadiths 2402, 2404, 2406, and 2407.
Right. It shows the compassion and understanding again, recognizing that sometimes circumstances can make it difficult to fulfill those obligations completely.
Travel can be so demanding, and Islam recognizes that. These hadiths offer guidelines for travelers, allowing them to break their fast if they meet certain criteria, like the distance of their journey or difficulty in obtaining food and water.
So it's not a blanket exemption, but rather a set of conditions.
Exactly. And Hadith 24:6 even mentions an example where a companion of the Prophet broke his fast while traveling on a boat, even though he hadn't physically left the city yet.
Wow. So even if the journey isn't conventionally seen as arduous.
It highlights that flexibility, that willingness to adapt to individual circumstances, prioritizing ease and practicality and observing the spirit of the law.
It's a great reminder that Islam is a religion of mercy and understanding. And that leads us to a really important point raised in Hadith 2409, the importance of humility in worship, avoiding any arrogance or self-righteousness.
It's a gentle but crucial reminder to approach worship with sincerity, recognizing that it's for the sake of Allah, not for personal gain or recognition.
It's about the inner state, the intention, the purity of the heart, not outward appearances.
Precisely. Our worship is a gift from Allah, and we should never take it for granted or use it to elevate ourselves above others.
Okay, let's delve into the specific days when fasting is prohibited or discouraged. Hadiths 2413, 2415, and 2419 give us some guidance on this.
These hadiths are about distinguishing between those days of celebration and those days of fasting, honoring the spirit of each.
So fasting on Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha, those two major Islamic festivals, is prohibited. Why is that?
Because those days are for rejoicing, for celebrating, for coming together as a community. Fasting on those days would contradict that spirit of joy and gratitude that they represent.
It makes sense. And Hadith 2415 also mentions the prohibition of fasting on Saturdays, unless as part of an obligatory fast, like making up for a missed fast.
Right. And this is linked to the Jewish tradition of observing the Sabbath on Saturday. It's about Islam distinguishing itself, emphasizing its own unique practices and identity.
It's about maintaining that distinct Islamic identity, rooted in its own beliefs and practices. Now, moving on to something a bit more positive, Hadiths 2422, 21425, 2430, and 2431 talk about recommended voluntary fasts beyond Ramadan. It's like a whole other dimension of fasting that we can explore.
It is. These hadiths, they offer us a glimpse into the Prophet Muhammad's personal practice, highlighting those specific days and months that he favored for voluntary fasting. It's like a blueprint for us, offering guidance on how to incorporate those practices into our own lives.
So, for instance, we mentioned that the Prophet loved to fast during Shaban. Was that a way of preparing for the physical and spiritual demands of Ramadan?
Many believe it was. It's a way to gradually increase our fasting, acclimate our bodies, and cultivate that heightened sense of spiritual awareness.
And what about those specific days of the week? Mondays and Thursdays.
The Prophet explained that on Mondays and Thursdays, our deeds are presented to Allah. Fasting on those days, it's like seeking His favor at a time when our actions are being reviewed.
Wow. It's like aligning ourselves with the divine schedule, so to speak. And the hadiths also mention the benefits of fasting on certain days within specific months, like the first 9 days of Dhul Hijjah, the month of Hajj.
Yeah, it's a way of aligning ourselves with the spiritual energy of Hajj, joining millions of Muslims globally in that shared act of devotion.
It's amazing how these practices connect us as a global community.
Mm.
Okay, let's move on to Hadith 2434. It talks about a specific prohibition against fasting on the day of Arafah for those performing Hajj.
This hadith, it's all about recognizing the unique nature of the day of Arafah, which is the most important day of Hajj. It's a day for intense supplication, seeking forgiveness, standing in humble presence before Allah on the plains of Arafat.
So even though fasting is generally encouraged, it's specifically prohibited on this day for those performing Hajj.
Precisely. Fasting, especially in the heat and demanding conditions of Hajj, could weaken the pilgrims, preventing them from fully engaging in those rituals.
So it's about prioritizing the rituals of Hajj over the practice of fasting in this specific context.
Exactly. It's a practical consideration, ensuring that they can fulfill those essential rites without compromising their health and well-being.
It shows how Islamic teachings adapt to specific situations. Now let's talk about accidentally breaking the fast, which can be a bit stressful for people. Hadith 2441 provides some clarity on this.
It explains those circumstances, in the process of making amends. It emphasizes that if someone unintentionally eats or drinks, forgetting that they're fasting, the fast is broken, but they're not sinful.
The key is that it's unintentional, not deliberate.
Exactly. They should complete the rest of the day's fast and then fast another day to make up for the one that was broken.
It's such a relief to know that there's that understanding, that flexibility in those situations.
Absolutely. It speaks to that mercy and forgiveness that's at the heart of Islam.
Okay, I'm really interested in these next few hadiths. 2443, 2445, and 2446. They all highlight the practice of fasting on the white days, which are the 13th, 14th, and 15th of each lunar month.
These are some powerful hadiths. They highlight the spiritual benefits of fasting during this time, and it's connected to those lunar cycles. Those are the days of the full moon.
And Hadith 2443 even says that fasting on these 3 days is like keeping a perpetual fast.
It's a powerful statement highlighting the immense rewards associated with this practice. It's simple, yet profound, connecting us to the natural world.
It makes you wonder why these days aren't more widely observed.
Perhaps it's because they're voluntary, not obligatory. Maybe the knowledge isn't as widespread. Whatever the reason, the hadiths emphasize the virtue, encouraging us to incorporate them.
It's all about connecting with those natural rhythms, and this leads us to something crucial that runs through all these hadiths, the importance of intention. Hadith 23448 states that if you don't decide to fast before dawn, then you're not actually fasting.
That pre-dawn intention is so vital. It's what sets a true fast apart from just abstaining from food and drink. It's that inner commitment that matters.
So the physical act alone isn't enough.
Not at all. The hadith is very clear on that. Without that conscious intention, it's meaningless, an empty gesture. It's the intention that makes it a true act of worship.
And this concept of intention isn't limited to just fasting, right?
Of course not. It applies to every aspect of Islamic practice. Prayer, charity, pilgrimage, everything requires that conscious intention to be valid. It's a fundamental principle in Islam, recognizing that actions are judged by the intentions behind them.
It's about being mindful, purposeful, ensuring that our outward actions reflect that inner commitment.
Yes, It's not just about rituals, it's a way of life. It's about aligning our thoughts, our words, and our actions with the will of Allah. It's seeking His pleasure in everything we do.
This deep dive into the Sunan Abu Dawud has been truly enlightening. It's amazing how these hadiths, from centuries ago, can still offer guidance and insight that's so relevant to our lives today.
It is truly remarkable. It's a testament to the wisdom of the Prophet Muhammad's teachings and the meticulous efforts of scholars like Abu Dawud who preserve them for us.
And they provide such a valuable window into the lives and practices of the early Muslims. Their challenges, their triumphs, their unwavering faith, their dedication to Allah, it's truly inspiring.
It is. It makes you realize that we're part of a long and continuous chain of believers, striving to live our lives in accordance with Allah's will. And it's comforting to know that we're not alone on this journey. We have the guidance of the Prophet and the wisdom of these hadiths to light our way.
Beautifully said.
It really is. It makes you realize that we're part of a long and continuous chain of believers, striving to live our lives in accordance with Allah's will. And it's comforting to know that we're not alone on this journey. We have the guidance of the Prophet and the wisdom of these hadiths to light our way.
Beautifully said. I'm especially intrigued by Hadith 2457, which delves into the practice of itikaf, that spiritual retreat in the mosque, particularly during the last 10 days of Ramadan, something I've always wanted to understand better.
Ugh, itikaf. It's a profound practice, seeking that intense connection with Allah by literally dwelling in the house of God, immersing oneself in an atmosphere of prayer and contemplation, shutting out the noise and distractions of the world, and focusing solely on the divine.
The Hadith mentions that the Prophet Muhammad would observe itikaf for the last 10 days of Ramadan, setting a powerful example for his followers.
Yes, and in 1 year, he even extended it to 20 days. It really highlights the importance he placed on this practice, particularly during those final, most blessed days of Ramadan, when the night of power, Layla al-Qadr, is believed to occur.
But it's not just about seclusion, right? Hadith 2467 outlines certain guidelines, like not visiting the sick or attending funerals while in itikaf, which seems counterintuitive given the importance Islam places on these acts.
That's right. The focus during itikaf is on minimizing worldly distractions and maximizing spiritual immersion. It's about dedicating yourself completely to worship, reflection, and seeking closeness to Allah. So even acts of kindness and social obligations that we normally consider paramount are put on hold during itikaf. That's fascinating.
Exactly. The idea is to create a kind of spiritual bubble where your primary concern is your connection with the divine. Of course, essential needs are still taken care of, but the emphasis is on minimizing anything that might pull you away from that focused state of worship. It's about creating a space where the heart is free to commune with its creator, undistracted by the demands of everyday life.
It sounds incredibly intense, almost like a spiritual boot camp, but also incredibly rewarding, a chance to recharge and reconnect on a deeper level.
It can be both. It's a practice that demands discipline and commitment, but the potential for spiritual growth and renewal is immense. It's about stripping away the layers of worldliness that accumulate over time, purifying the heart, and returning to a state of pristine awareness of the divine. Hadith 368 sheds some light on the origins of itikaf, mentioning that Umar, the second caliph, had made a vow in pre-Islamic times to spend a night in devotion at the Kaaba, the holiest shrine in Islam. This suggests that the concept of seeking spiritual seclusion predates Islam, doesn't it?
It does seem that way. The desire to step away from the hustle and bustle of life, to seek solace and connection in a place dedicated to the divine. It seems to be a natural human inclination, a yearning for transcendence, a recognition of a reality beyond the material world.
And when Umar asked the Prophet about fulfilling that vow, he was instructed to observe itikaf and fast, merging pre-Islamic practices with Islamic principles.
It highlights the Prophet's wisdom in integrating existing practices that were compatible with Islamic values, transforming them into acts of worship that aligned with the tenets of the new faith. It's a beautiful example of continuity and transformation, preserving the essence of spiritual seeking while elevating it to a higher plane.
Hadith 2469 adds another interesting detail to this story. While Umar was observing itikaf, there was a commotion outside, and he inquired about it, even though he was supposed to minimize worldly interactions.
Yes, and it turned out to be the arrival of captives from the Hawazin tribe, whom the Prophet had set free after the Battle of Hunayn. Upon learning this, Umar, even in this state of spiritual seclusion, was moved by compassion and sent a slave girl who was with him to be freed along with the others.
It's a beautiful example of how, even in moments of intense personal worship, The spirit of compassion and justice remained paramount in the hearts of the early Muslims.
It speaks volumes about Umar's character and the values that were central to early Islam. It reminds us that our spiritual practices should never be divorced from our responsibilities to others and our commitment to social justice. It's a beautiful reminder that Islam is not just about personal piety, but about creating a just and compassionate society.
Speaking of justice and compassion, we've talked extensively about the importance of intention in fasting. Hadith 2448 makes it clear that you have to consciously decide to fast before dawn for it to be considered a valid act of worship.
Yes, that pre-dawn intention is crucial. It's what distinguishes a true fast from simply abstaining from food and drink. It's the intention that transforms a physical act of deprivation into a spiritual act of devotion.
But what happens if you unintentionally break your fast? Hadiths 2450 and 2451 address this, and it seems like there's a lot of understanding and flexibility in these situations, recognizing that we're human and prone to mistakes, especially when it comes to something as physically demanding as fasting.
Absolutely. Islam recognizes our human fallibility and offers guidance and reassurance for those who make unintentional errors. It's about striving for excellence while acknowledging our imperfections, seeking forgiveness when we fall short, and continually striving to improve ourselves.
For example, in Hadith 2450, Hani accidentally broke her fast during the conquest of Mecca and was understandably worried about the implications of her action.
The Prophet, however, reassured her, emphasizing that as long as it was an unintentional act, it wouldn't harm her. It's a beautiful reminder that Allah looks at our hearts and intentions, not just our outward actions. It's a testament to the mercy and compassion that lie at the heart of Islam, offering comfort and reassurance to those who strive to follow its teachings with sincerity.
And in Hadith 234:51, Aisha and Hafsa, the Prophet's wives, accidentally broke their fast after being tempted by a gift of food. Again, the Prophet showed compassion, advising them to simply make up for the broken fast by fasting another day.
It's a beautiful example of the Prophet's gentle guidance, offering practical solutions without resorting to harsh judgment or condemnation. It highlights the principle of ease and understanding that permeates Islamic teachings, ensuring that worship remains accessible and attainable for all.
It's so reassuring to know that there's room for human error, and that Islam offers a path to make amends without overwhelming guilt or burden. It makes the practice of fasting feel less daunting, knowing that there's room for mistakes and that Allah is forgiving and merciful.
It speaks to the beauty of Allah's mercy and the emphasis on sincerity over rigid adherence to rules. It's a reminder that Islam is about striving to do our best, seeking forgiveness when we falter, and continually seeking to improve ourselves. It's a journey of spiritual growth, not a destination of flawless perfection.
This reminds me of Hadith 2473, which addresses a situation where a husband prevents his wife from fasting, a scenario that might seem surprising given the importance of fasting in Islam.
Yes, that's a very interesting one. It highlights the delicate balance between individual religious obligations and the dynamics of a marriage, recognizing that sometimes individual desires need to be weighed against the well-being of the family unit.
In this case, the wife was seemingly devoted to fasting, but her husband was concerned about the impact on their relationship, feeling that her fasting was excessive and was causing a strain.
The Prophet, upon hearing this, acknowledged the husband's right to prevent his wife from fasting in this specific situation, emphasizing the importance of open communication and mutual understanding within a marriage. It's a reminder that while fulfilling religious obligations is important, it shouldn't come at the expense of marital harmony or create unnecessary conflict within the family.
It's a reminder that Islam seeks to promote balance and well-being in all aspects of life, recognizing that harmony within the family unit is essential for a thriving and spiritually grounded society.
It's a reminder that Islam is not about rigid adherence to rules, but about seeking solutions that promote both individual and collective well-being, recognizing that the family is the foundation of a healthy and vibrant society. Sometimes that requires compromise and understanding, putting the needs of the family unit above individual desires, even when it comes to religious practices.
Okay, back to the topic of voluntary fasting. Hadiths 2422, 2425, 2430, and 2431 provide some wonderful insights into the Prophet's own practices and recommendations, offering a glimpse into how he integrated voluntary fasts into his life.
These hadiths really paint a beautiful picture of the Prophet's commitment to voluntary fasting as a means of spiritual growth and closeness to Allah, showing us that it wasn't just about fulfilling obligations, but about seeking a deeper, more intimate connection with the divine.
For example, Hadith 2425 mentions that the Prophet's favorite month for fasting outside of Ramadan was Shaban, the month preceding Ramadan.
He would often connect Shaban with Ramadan, fasting for most, if not all, of the month. It was as if he was using Shaban as a spiritual training ground, preparing himself for the intensity of Ramadan, building up his spiritual stamina, and intensifying his focus on his relationship with Allah.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And it's a practice that many Muslims follow today, using Shaban as a time to ramp up their spiritual practices, to gradually transition into the heightened spiritual atmosphere of Ramadan, and to prepare themselves for the challenges and blessings of this holy month.
It's a time for reflection, for self-evaluation, and for making amends for any shortcomings in our worship. It's a time to purify our hearts and minds, to set aside worldly distractions, and to focus on our relationship with Allah.
Hadith 2430 highlights another interesting practice, fasting on Mondays and Thursdays, seemingly ordinary days that the Prophet imbued with special significance.
The Prophet explained that these days were special because the deeds of people are presented to Allah on Mondays and Thursdays. By fasting on those days, you're essentially seeking Allah's favor at a time when your actions are being reviewed, presenting your acts of devotion at a time when they are most likely to be noticed and accepted.
So it's a way of aligning ourselves with the divine timetable, so to speak, presenting our best selves at a time when our actions are being scrutinized and our intentions are being weighed.
Exactly. It's a beautiful way to infuse our lives with mindfulness and intention, recognizing that our actions are constantly being observed and recorded. It's a reminder to strive for excellence in all that we do, knowing that we are accountable for every thought, word, and deed.
Hadith 2431 sheds some more light on the Prophet's regular fasting routine, revealing a structured and consistent approach to incorporating voluntary fast into his life.
It mentions that he would fast 3 days every month, specifically the first Monday and Thursday, and then another Monday the following week. It's a simple yet effective routine, demonstrating that even amidst the demands of leadership and prophethood, he made time for these acts of personal devotion.
It's fascinating to get this glimpse into his personal practices. It makes these voluntary fasts seem much more attainable, knowing that even the Prophet had a structured routine, incorporating these practices into his busy life without disrupting his responsibilities.
It also emphasizes that consistency is key. It's not about sporadic bursts of intense fasting, but about incorporating these practices into your life in a sustainable way, making them a regular part of your spiritual rhythm.
Hadith 2422 tells a heartwarming story about a man who had dedicated himself to fasting every night, pushing himself to the limits of his physical endurance in his zeal to please Allah.
He was so committed to this practice that his physical appearance had changed dramatically, becoming emaciated and weak. When the Prophet saw him, he was concerned and advised him to fast in a more balanced way, recognizing that excessive asceticism could be harmful.
The Prophet recommended fasting during Ramadan, of course, and then adding a day of fasting each month, gradually increasing the frequency as the man's strength and stamina allowed.
The man, eager to do more, kept asking the Prophet to increase the number of fasting days, demonstrating his sincere desire to push himself further in his devotion.
And the Prophet, showing compassion and wisdom, gradually increased the days until he advised him to fast during the sacred months, which are Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, Muharram, and Rajab, months that hold special significance in the Islamic calendar.
It's a beautiful example of how the Prophet tailored his guidance to the individual's capacity and zeal, while also emphasizing the importance of balance and moderation, recognizing that spiritual practices should nourish us, not deplete us.
It's a reminder that Islam is a religion of ease, not hardship, and that principle applies even to voluntary acts of worship. It's about finding that balance between pushing ourselves spiritually and recognizing our limitations, ensuring that our worship is sustainable and brings us closer to Allah without causing harm to ourselves.
It's about seeking that sweet spot where our worship is both challenging and fulfilling, pushing us to grow spiritually while respecting our physical and emotional well-being.
Speaking of sacred months, there's a specific prohibition mentioned in Hadith 2434 regarding fasting on the day of Arafah for those performing Hajj, highlighting the unique nature of this day and its place within the Hajj rituals.
Yes, that's an important distinction. While fasting on the day of Arafah is highly recommended for those who are not performing Hajj, it's specifically prohibited for pilgrims. The day of Arafah is the most important day of Hajj, a day of intense supplication and standing in humble presence before Allah on the plains of Arafat.
Fasting, especially in the heat and demanding conditions of Hajj, could potentially weaken the pilgrims and prevent them from fully engaging in the rituals, which require both physical and spiritual stamina.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the priorities within different acts of worship. In this case, the rituals of Hajj take precedence over the practice of fasting. It's a practical consideration, ensuring that pilgrims are able to fulfill the essential rites of Hajj without undue hardship or compromising their health.
It's another example of how Islamic teachings are adaptable and context-specific, always seeking to promote ease and facilitate meaningful worship, recognizing that sometimes flexibility and adaptation are necessary to ensure the well-being of individuals and the fulfillment of religious obligations in their entirety.
It's a reminder that the spirit of the law is just as important as the letter of the law, and that sometimes compassion and practicality require us to make exceptions. It's about approaching religious practices with wisdom and discernment, understanding the underlying principles, and applying them with sensitivity to individual circumstances.
Okay, let's delve into a topic that often causes confusion, the ruling on accidentally breaking the fast. Hadith 2441 provides some clarification on this matter, offering guidance and reassurance for those who find themselves in this situation.
This hadith addresses a situation where a group of people unintentionally broke their fast, likely due to forgetfulness or a misunderstanding of the timings. It highlights the importance of seeking knowledge and understanding the nuances of religious practices to avoid unintentional errors.
And what was the Prophet's guidance in this situation?
The Prophet instructed them to complete the rest of that day's fast and to make atonement by fasting another day in its place. It's a simple yet meaningful way to rectify an unintentional mistake. The emphasis is on making amends, not on punishment or harsh judgment. It's a beautiful example of the balance between accountability and mercy that permeates Islamic teachings.
It's reassuring to know that there's room for human error, and that Islam provides a path to make things right without unnecessary guilt or burden. It encourages us to strive for excellence while acknowledging our human fallibility, seeking forgiveness when we err, and continually striving to improve ourselves.
Absolutely. It speaks to the mercy and forgiveness that are at the heart of Islam, offering comfort and guidance to those who strive to follow its teachings with sincerity and humility. It reminds us that our journey towards righteousness is a process, not a destination, and that Allah is with us every step of the way, guiding us, forgiving us, and helping us to become the best versions of ourselves.
Now, this next set of hadiths is particularly intriguing. Hadiths 2443, 2444, 2445, and 2446 all highlight the practice of fasting on the white days, which are the 13th, 14th, and 15th of each lunar month. It's a practice I've heard of but haven't fully grasped.
These hadiths emphasize the virtue and spiritual rewards associated with this practice, connecting it to the natural cycles of the cosmos and the heightened spiritual energy believed to be present during the full moon.
And Hadith 2443 even goes so far as to say that fasting on these 3 days is like keeping a perpetual fast. It's a remarkable statement, given the challenges of maintaining a continuous fast.
It's a powerful statement highlighting the immense spiritual reward associated with this practice. It's simple yet profound, connecting us to the natural world.
It makes you wonder why these days aren't more widely observed.
Perhaps it's because they're voluntary, not obligatory. Maybe the knowledge isn't as widespread. Whatever the reason, the hadiths emphasize the virtue, encouraging us to incorporate them.
It's all about connecting with those natural rhythms. And this leads us to something crucial that runs through all these hadiths, the importance of intention. Hadith 2448 states that if you don't decide to fast before dawn, then you're not actually fasting.
That pre-dawn intention, it's so vital. It's what sets a true fast apart from just abstaining from food and drink. It's that inner commitment that matters.
So the physical act alone isn't enough.
Not at all. The hadith is very clear on that. Without that conscious intention, it's meaningless, an empty gesture. It's the intention that makes it a true act of worship.
And this concept of intention isn't limited to just fasting, right?
Of course not.
Yeah.
It applies to every aspect of Islamic practice. Prayer, charity, pilgrimage. Everything requires that conscious intention to be considered valid. It's a fundamental principle in Islam, recognizing that actions are judged by the intentions behind them.
It's about being mindful, purposeful, ensuring that our outward actions reflect that inner commitment.
Yes, it's not just about rituals, it's a way of life. It's about aligning our thoughts, our words, and our actions with the will of Allah. It's seeking His pleasure in everything we do.
This deep dive into the Sunan Abu Dawud has been truly enlightening. It's amazing how these hadiths from centuries ago can still offer guidance and insight that's so relevant to our lives today.
It is truly remarkable. It's a testament to the wisdom of the Prophet Muhammad's teachings and the meticulous efforts of scholars like Abu Dawud who preserve them for us.
As we wrap up this second part of our exploration, I'm left with a sense of awe at the depth and beauty of these teachings. I feel like I'm just beginning to scratch the surface of their wisdom and relevance. What about you? What has stood out to you the most?
I'm struck by the emphasis on balance and compassion that permeates these hadiths. It's a reminder that Islam is a religion of ease, not hardship, and that our spiritual practices should nourish us, not deplete us. The focus on intention is also incredibly powerful, reminding us that our actions are only as meaningful as the intentions behind them. It's about cultivating a heart that is aligned with the divine will, a heart that seeks to please Allah in all that it does.
Beautifully said. And there's so much more to uncover. Join us in the final part of our deep dive as we continue to explore the wisdom contained within the Sunan Abu Dawud, delving into its depths and uncovering the treasures that await those who seek to understand the nuances of fasting and its transformative power. It's remarkable, really, how these teachings can still resonate so deeply with us today. It's like they hold this timeless wisdom, offering guidance and insights into the practice of fasting, its impact on our lives, centuries later.
Absolutely. It's a testament to that enduring wisdom of the Prophet's teachings and those who, like Abu Dawud, so meticulously preserve these gems for future generations.
We were talking about intention in fasting and how Islam addresses those instances when, someone accidentally breaks the fast. Hadiths 2450 and 2451, they offer some really comforting reminders. It's not about perfection, but striving, seeking forgiveness, recommitting ourselves.
Mm-hmm. It really highlights that mercy, that understanding in Islamic law. We're human. We make mistakes, especially with something as physically demanding as fasting can be.
Hadith 2450, it tells the story of Hamia, who, she accidentally breaks her fast during the conquest of Mecca.
Hmm.
It's a pretty significant moment, and she's understandably worried.
That the Prophet, he reassures her,
Yeah.
as long as it was unintentional, it's not going to harm her.
It's a beautiful example, isn't it? Allah judging us by our hearts, our intentions,
Mhm.
not just those outward actions, those slip-ups.
Absolutely. It's about striving, seeking to fulfill his commands the best that we can. And when we make mistakes, we seek forgiveness and try to do better.
Hadith 2451. Now, Aisha and Hafsa, they're the Prophet's wives, and they accidentally break their fast. There's this gift of food. Temptation got the better of them. It happens.
It does. And the Prophet, he advises them to simply make up for the broken fast. Fast another day. Practical, straightforward.
It's comforting knowing there's room for those human moments.
Hmm.
Allah is forgiving, merciful.
And it emphasizes that sincerity. It's not about rigid adherence to rules. It's that effort, that genuine attempt.
Hadith 2453. It addresses this situation where, and this is interesting, a husband prevents his wife from fasting. It seems almost surprising given how important fasting is in Islam.
Right. It's a reminder of that delicate balance, individual obligations, and the dynamics of a marriage. Sometimes individual needs have to be weighed against the well-being of the family as a whole.
In this instance, it's the wife who's very devoted to fasting, but her husband's concerned, about the impact on their relationship, feels it's causing a strain.
Open communication, mutual understanding, it's so crucial in a marriage, especially when navigating religious practices and how they can impact the relationship.
And the Prophet, he acknowledges the husband's right to prevent his wife from fasting in this specific situation. It's not about one spouse dictating the other's practice, but finding that balance, respecting each other, the well-being of the marriage. It reminds us that Islam, it promotes this balance, well-being in every aspect of life, harmony in the family. It's essential, a thriving society, a spiritually grounded one.
It's about finding those solutions that honor individual commitments, but also the well-being of the whole, this delicate balance. We see it reflected in the practice of itikaf as well.
Ah, yes, etiquette. That spiritual retreat in the mosque. It's such a powerful way to create that space for deep spiritual immersion. But Hadith 2467, it outlines those restrictions, right? Limiting interactions with the outside world, even for things that we might consider important.
That's the point, though, isn't it? To create that environment, minimize distractions, maximize the opportunity for deep contemplation, that connection with Allah, stepping back from the world, focusing solely on your relationship with the divine.
Even acts of kindness, social engagement, those get put on hold.
Mm-hmm. It's about complete dedication to worship, to reflection. It's almost like hitting that reset button. realigning with your core values, your purpose.
It sounds so challenging. A spiritual detox.
It can be challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding. A chance to recharge, to reconnect, to purify the heart, quiet the mind. It's experiencing that profound peace and tranquility, being in the presence of the divine.
These hadiths, they really offer us a wealth of ways to incorporate voluntary fasting into our lives, even beyond Ramadan.
From those Mondays and Thursdays to the white days, to even dedicating entire months. It's about finding what speaks to you, what helps you connect with Allah, what brings you closer to Him.
It's inspiring seeing how the Prophet Muhammad himself embraced those voluntary fasts. Makes them feel more attainable. He had his own routine, incorporating them into his life.
And that consistency is key, right? Not just those sporadic bursts. It's about making it part of your spiritual rhythm, a regular practice.
This deep dive into the Sunan Abu Dawud, it's been eye-opening. The wisdom, the guidance in these hadiths, it's just incredible.
It's been a privilege to explore them together, to uncover those gems, to connect with the spirit of the Prophet and his companions.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to reflect on what we've discussed, to explore the hadiths further. Find ways to bring their teachings into your lives, enrich your practice, your connection with Allah.
May these teachings illuminate our paths, strengthen our faiths, and guide us towards a life of meaning, purpose, and closeness to Allah.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, may peace and blessings be upon you all.